More now on the situation in Ukraine and the surprise call from the Russian President Vladimir Putin that pro-Moscow separatist leaders in Ukraine postpone a vote on secession just 5 days before it was to be held. With his views, here's Tom Switzer, the research associate with the United States Study Centre. Good to see you, Tom.
Ross.
So what do you make of Vladimir Putin's call to postpone this vote?
Well, it's not just that call itself, it's also his softening opposition to the Ukrainian national elections due on May 25. That's interesting because those elections will almost certainly lead to a more pro-Western government. But it's also his decision today, or he says he's going to withdraw the tens of thousands of Russian troops along the border. Now, taken together, this could mark a serious attempt to de-escalate the crisis that has been raging since the collapse of the Ukrainian government in February.
Authorities in the Ukraine, though, and indeed in the West, say it's all hot air.
Well, look, the point to bear in mind here is that there is a danger here that Putin has miscalculated. I mean, he does not want a military campaign in Eastern Europe that will be bloody. And the difference between a potential bloody conflict in Eastern Europe and the Crimean intervention is that the Crimean intervention was bloodless. It didn't lose any lives, and it was a fairly peaceful transition to a referendum which ultimately led to the Crimean succession. The Eastern European case could be potentially bloody because it's only Russian separatists in eastern towns that are really calling for this, and they look increasingly isolated.
Is there a danger that those separatist leaders could go ahead with this vote without the support of Moscow? Could that happen?
It's conceivable, but it's highly unlikely. If Putin is not going to give them support, why would they be a lamb to the slaughter in a way, because they'd be even more isolated in the new Russia? I think the onus here now is on the Americans to show that they're prepared to back off if indeed Putin is serious, and the Americans and Brussels remain sceptical that Putin is serious, that he will be able to have the capacity to change things on the ground. But if he is serious, the Americans then should probably more than likely de-escalate the crisis by making it quite clear that they won't interfere in the internal affairs of Ukraine and that they will not include Ukraine as part of NATO, and moreover demand that Kiev give minority rights to the ethnic Russians who are in the new Ukraine, which has less Russian influence than it did before this crisis broke out.
The Americans are still talking about sanctions against Russia, though.
I think that would be a big mistake, because isolating Russia over this matter could make things desperate for Russia. Now, Russia, if desperate and humiliated further, could act in unpredictable and dangerous ways in the way that a wounded animal could. I mean, we have to remember that Russia, although it's a middle-ranked power, it is a great power, although it's in decline, and it still has a vast nuclear arsenal, and it has a lot of potential to cause damage to not just Ukraine's economy, but to many Western European economies by tightening its gas sales and raising the price. So Russia still has cards up its sleeve.
If this is the beginning of the end of this crisis, as we all hope, and you suggest that it might be, does it mean then that the West has to change its approach to Russia, and it really has to make a bigger effort to welcome it and to pull it into the international community?
Well, opinion is divided. My view, for what it's worth, is that there was an implicit agreement reached between President Bush Sr. and President Gorbachev in the late 80s, early 1990s, with the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And the agreement was that in exchange for a reunified Germany to be part of NATO, the West would not go east. But during the Clinton era, during the Bush Jr. era, and to some extent during the Obama era, the United States and Brussels have pushed the NATO alliance to include many countries in Eastern Europe and the Baltics. And that has naturally upset Russia because they see this as an infringement on their sphere of influence. So I think it makes sense to maybe back off a bit, give a bit of space to Putin, but at the same time encourage him to de-escalate things. And if his intent is serious today, then that looks like it could happen.
Tom Switzer, thank you.
Thanks, Roz.